Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today, January 18th of 2022, to talk to you about an important issue, about hate. Where is hate coming from in 2022? We're talking about 60 years after the Civil Rights Movement. And today, the day after the celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King, I want to have that conversation. I was speaking with a friend who brought this up to me. We were talking about where is hate coming from, the differences in America, the separation that we're seeing today, the degree of separation. And we have to ask the question, where is that coming from after so much has changed? Not just in the nation, in my lifetime. So much has changed, and yet there's so much hate that exists at this time. We're going to investigate that a little bit. And before we get started, we do want to mention that if this is the first time that you are seeing this channel, we welcome you and we thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow. We take your chats, your texts, your phone calls, to hear what you have to say about the issues that are affecting us all, not just in America, but around the globe, because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe that everyone has a right to free speech. Even if your government disagrees, even if the internet overlords may disagree, we believe in your voice and your thoughts, and we listen to that every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in our live stream, which we invite you to join us. We hope to see you this Sunday. Now, speaking about the question of hate, and this is a big and difficult question. It's a question that many people are wondering about. We've heard from BLM, we've heard from Antifa, we've heard from the Democratic Socialists of America, as well as many, many others who are not as far left and progressive leaning, to talk about the question of hate. We see it in our schools, we see it in laws. We have the voting rights laws that are trying to be enacted at this moment. We have critical race theory applications being put into our schools at elementary and even high school levels, besides that in college. The question is about hate. How do we fight hate? How do we prevent hate from continuing to grow? But the question also is, are we in this process creating more hate than we're trying to stop? It's an interesting question, and it's an important question because we're seeing applications of hate. We're seeing this in a diversified way. It's not just about race. It's not just about gender or sexual preference. It's not just about some of the hot button issues. Let's take a look at January 13th. A poll was released by Rasmussen. And in this poll, they were looking at voters and some of the things that voters would allow in America. And you tell me if you think this is hateful. 55% of Democratic voters said that they would support a bill or legislation from the federal or state level to fine Americans who do not get the pandemic vaccination. That's incredible. 55% of Democrats want you to be fined if you don't do what the government says. Now, 58% of all voters, that's independents, Republicans, and Democrats, and Libertarians, and the Green Party, say they don't agree with this. But 55% of Democrats say they do believe in that the government should have the right to decide your personal medical health. 59% of Democrats say they are in favor of a government policy that requires citizens to be confined in their homes, to lock them in solitary confinement with very few exceptions. Essentially, if your house is burning down, you can get out of the house, but otherwise, you need to be locked in that house because you didn't accept a government mandate. 61% of all voters, Republicans, Libertarians, Conservatives, Green Party, all voters disagree with this, but 59% of Democrats say yes, solitary confinement for not obeying the government. 48% of Democratic voters think the federal government and state government should be able to fine or imprison people who question what's going on with the medications and the policies in dealing with the pandemic. Think about that. 48% of Democrats say you cannot question the government, that you have to obey. There is no dispute. There is no question. The basis of scientific theory, which is to question everything and then to determine through experimentation and repeat results to determine what is truth, or what is the truth as best as we can understand it at any given moment. They deny this. They dispute this. Science is not important. Obedience is what is important. 45% of Democrats favor that citizens should live temporarily in specialist camps, locations, facilities, whatever you want to call it, if they refuse to get the COVID-19 vaccine. This is something we're seeing in New Zealand and Australia, where citizens are being taken from their homes by the police and the government and the military and taken over to facilities, camps, whatever you want to call it, and they're being imprisoned there by the dictates of the government. This is authoritarian. This is what we saw in Russia. We saw this under Stalin, where entire villages would be told, you have to move or you die. That's it. And what's the difference between move, or the government will force you to move, you must be put into an internment camp? What's the difference between that and move or die? And how is this different than the internment camps we saw in the 1940s in World War II, the Japanese internment camps that were created in America, which we now today say are absolutely aberrant, that this was something that was horrible and we had to apologize for, something we've covered on this channel before. But I want you to understand, this isn't new. This isn't something that hasn't been said before. In fact, it was back in April of 2020, that we saw that this very same idea, locking Americans up, making them confined, solitary confinement, was something that was already proposed. In Broome County, we had County Executive Jason Garnar say exactly what we're seeing in the poll just 4 days ago, that American citizens should be locked in their homes. They should be confined and isolated because the government said so. Because you have to be obedient and you should not question. And we had some thoughts about that at the time. But I think we've gone too far. I think we've gone too far before, but this is too much to me. This is like saying you're a prisoner in your home. This is a solitary confinement. This is saying that you're stuck in your house and you can't get out. That you're only allowed out when the government is saying you're allowed out. And even if you're taking every precaution, you're wearing masks, you're wearing gloves, you're keeping social distance of 6 feet, you're doing all the things that you can to protect other people, but still living a life, that's not enough. Now you need the approval of the government to be outside. Let's be clear. We are talking about approval from the government to live your life, to be able to take care of your health and that of your family and your children. Maybe you have leukemia, you have cancer, perhaps you have adverse reactions to medications, perhaps you have a religious objection. Whatever the reason, no matter what it may be, no matter whether it is founded on science or medicine or religion, it doesn't matter. Whatever your reasoning may be, it doesn't count because the government says you must do this. And as we are seeing, there is a majority of a part of America, not the majority of Americans. No, the majority of Americans over and over again dispute this. They deny this. They say this is unconstitutional, that it violates our freedoms and our rights. But yet we have majorities of Democrats who are saying, no, we're willing to forego freedom and any of our rights and constitutional guarantees to be able to do what the government says. So I ask you, is that hateful? Is it hateful to throw people in a gulag because they didn't do what a government has said? That government is greater than the individual, which would be very new for America. That would be a reversal of the foundation, the bedrock that this nation was created on. Is that hateful? Let me ask you a question. A lot of people have been talking about comments from Joe Biden yesterday on Martin Luther King's birthday. And many people have brought up the fact that it was back in June of 2020 that Joe Biden had said even Dr. King's assassination did not have the worldwide impact that George Floyd's death had. He compared George Floyd to Dr. Martin Luther King, and he diminished Dr. Martin Luther King's impact, an impact that was felt around the world that actually had worldwide reaction. That's not even in dispute. And even though Joe Biden seems to not remember history, history is documented in many countries, and they all reacted positively to the words of Dr. Martin Luther King. And even the members of the family of Dr. Martin Luther King spoke about that back in June of 2020. And they said, this is Alveda King, Dr. Martin Luther King's niece, said at the time, I believe that Mr. Biden continues to speak from his basement, from a reality that is different from what is happening in the real world. Why is it necessary to compare Dr. Martin Luther King and George Floyd? Truly, why would we compare a criminal, a repeat offender, a violent criminal who abused women and abused drugs? Why would we compare him to Dr. Martin Luther King, a pacifist, an individual who only sought to have equal rights and succeeded? Sadly, it cost his life, but he succeeded in getting many of those equal rights movements implemented in our nation. We had changes in laws. We had the growth and implementation of things like the affirmative action to ensure that we would have more diversity in our workplace, to allow people to ascend in business and in politics. It culminated in Barack Obama becoming elected not just once, but twice as president of the United States, something that was impossible if in the mindset during the time of Martin Luther King's life, and actually in the 70s and 80s in my lifetime, in the 90s of my lifetime, that was considered to be something beyond possibility. And yet we saw Barack Obama elected twice. So is it hateful to hear Joe Biden say that Dr. Martin Luther King is less than George Floyd, a convicted, repeat, violent, drug-addicted criminal? Is that hateful? Was it hateful when we heard that, and we reported on this on February 18th of 2021, when we heard Joe Biden speaking to the entire nation on CNN and in town hall, and he insulted, he denigrated people of color. In fact, we covered at this. This was a conversation about the underrepresentation of Hispanics and Blacks in taking the COVID-19 vaccine. But the thing that got me is when he said there, and again, I'll show you the White House page, and he says there, not everybody in the community, in the Hispanic and African American community, particularly in rural areas that are distant or in inner cities, know how to get online and determine how to get in line for the COVID vaccination. Let's be very specific here. Joe Biden just said that minorities, individuals who are Black, Hispanic, do not know how to get online. They do not know how to use the internet. That is insanely insulting. And we would say that again today. So it's not just his comments about Dr. Martin Luther King being lesser than George Floyd, and that the accomplishments of Dr. Martin Luther King were somehow minuscule or diminished in time. And to say that Blacks and Hispanics, individual minorities, are somehow incapable of doing the simplest of things on the internet. Once again, Joe Biden is in a different reality than where the rest of America is. And that's in 2021, just a year ago. Is that hateful? Was that because of hate? Now, you may say, well, no, Mike, these things aren't hateful, but they are based in fear. They are based in the best intentions, meant to gloss over the inefficiencies that some individuals may have or the misconceptions some may have. But that doesn't explain hate, because it does feel hateful. It does seem hateful. To be able to confine people in their homes, to lock them away because of their beliefs not matching the belief of the government. Maybe we should look at this from a different point of view, because this is beyond just medicine. It's beyond just policy. It's a way of thinking. And I think that's the important thing to understand. We have seen over and over again in the last 3 years alone that Democrats, and more the progressive wing of Democrats, the far left of Democrats, which are a minority within the Democratic Party, have had greater and greater influence trying to separate people and to punish people for not doing what they are told, which I believe is hateful. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. This was in October of 2019. And this is what happens to a young woman at Binghamton University when she decided to express her thoughts and her feelings. Why don't you introduce yourself?
My name's Lacey Kestisher. I'm a freshman at Binghamton, and basically I've gained a lot of popularity because I opened up a Turning Point chapter, which hasn't been sitting well with a lot of liberals as of right now. Lots of hate, getting attacked online. All I did, I simply put out a message. I think I said, "Hi, my name's Lacey Kestisher. Feel free to like the page. We're opening up a Turning Point chapter." And then, I don't know, people just didn't like it and then just started attacking me.
Hate. She was the victim of hate. And in that interview, we go on and we find out that it wasn't merely just cyberbullying that was going on. There were individuals who were in person trying to intimidate her. In fact, that environment that says that it's okay to hate someone based on their skin color, based on their political preference, well, that grew. And we saw that in 2019. Before George Floyd, before the riots with BLM, in 2019, we were reaching a peak. At Binghamton University, as an example, and this happened at other universities as well, we saw just a month after that conversation we had with Ms. Kestiger, when she was attacked and she was intimidated for saying she had a belief, she had an understanding of politics, that she wanted to meet up with others who had similar beliefs. We saw that on that very same campus of Binghamton University, that this was the feeling, this is what some felt they could do.
They're protecting! Who are they protecting?
Because you shut down an event. You shut down a sanctioned event. You don't even know me. You know nothing about me. You're an idiot. You're going to define me by my skin color.
This wasn't some kind of spontaneous thing. This was a mob that was called together for the simple purpose of intimidation and to try and cause fear into a group of people because they didn't like what they thought, because of the color of their skin, as you saw just then. It was made very clear, and there was plenty of video to show a mob that said, we have a certain point of view, and you must comply or else. And you're evil, you're wrong, because of the color of your skin. In fact, we had the conversation on November 17th, the day after that incident. We were speaking with some of the students of Binghamton University about what happened and the evidence of how it was conducted. On the left, it says, today on the spine, Trump supporters are actively advocating for the Trump administration and gun violence. Again, an image in support of the Second Amendment doesn't mean gun violence, but this is what they're saying.
Yes.
They go on to say, join us at 2 as we disrupt this space that Binghamton has allowed students to create and protest the racism, homophobia, and xenophobia that has erupted from the Trump and his supporters. Okay, before I go further, so they've already detailed that at 2 o'clock, an event that's going on that is not drawing a crowd, that does not have opposition by students or the university, that they were going to create an opposition, that they were going to create an incident, that due to their xenophobia of someone having an idea that was separate of their own, that they were going to go out there and they were going to incite an incident.
Yep.
That's what that text says. And they were gathering a mob to be able to do that.
Yes.
To be aggressors and to attack you, to try to intimidate you. And I don't say that slightly because in the picture right next to it, which appeared on The Culture, a community, Binghamton student community group text, we see that there's going to be some language here. An individual whose identity was not revealed said, I heard there's only 3 of the supporters there. Response, yeah, there's not that many, but fuck him up anyways. It's the reality. It's what happened in 2019. Let me ask you, does that sound hateful? That a group of individuals were labeled and identified based on their political preferences and their skin color, as we saw, and they were then labeled as evil and dangerous, and that they had to comply to the will of a mob that was put together simply to attack them. Just having an idea that was not approved was enough for a mob to come together and to attack, which violates the First Amendment, which violates everything about individuals having choices. At this time, this is why America is becoming more and more hateful. It's why we can see that 55% of Democrats are willing to lock up American citizens, not for committing a crime, but for not obeying the government. And that's what we're seeing on this college campus. And it got worse. November 19th of 2019, again, before George Floyd, before the BLM and Antifa riots that destroyed billions of dollars of property of individual businesses in Black-owned communities, Black homes and businesses. Even before any of that happened, we had this. And I have to ask, Councilman Conrad Taylor, who was part of the mob that attacked the Binghamton College Republicans, Councilman Taylor, Assemblywoman Donna Lopardo, County Executive Jason Garnar, Congressional Representative Anthony Brindisi, do you support this? Is this the Democratic Party that you are part of? Is this what you believe in? Is this what everyone is meant to accept as part of the Democratic Party? It's very clear. Plot made it very clear. They were there to disrupt. They weren't there to speak. They weren't there to share their ideas. They weren't there to let people know how they felt about an issue. They were there to disrupt, to intimidate, to harass, to menace. each of those being a crime in New York State and across the country. That's it. It was the promotion of hate at a university against students, against the community, because a small group of elites, of individuals, decided that you can't say something they didn't approve of, that you can't believe something that they didn't approve of, because you questioned what they thought, then you were somehow wrong. And the government, as we saw, a city councilman at that time was part of that mob, was part of that movement. And we heard from all of those, the rest of the elected officials there, from Assemblywoman Donna Lopardo, County Executive Jason Garnar, then Congressman Anthony Brindisi. Not one of them came out to say anything. None of them tried to stop it. Because of politics, I assume. Now, I do want to mention, I know every single one of those elected officials that I mentioned in this. And I'm not saying that they are bad people per se, but I am saying they weren't willing to speak up in the face of what was absolutely a violation of the First Amendment, what is absolutely an expression of hate. You know, it was so bad that a lawsuit was made against this, as we saw in October of 2020, a year later, because the university did nothing to protect the students. They did nothing to correct the situation. They, in fact, encouraged that this would happen again in the future by punishing the victims of the mob violence and the mob attacks, as we noted on October 2nd of 2020. They have announced as of September 30th that Binghamton University is being investigated, and I want to go into this and quote them. I believe it is here. That, and I will quote, instead, speaking about the events where students were attacked and that Dr. Art Leifer was silenced and his event was canceled by the Binghamton University, they state, instead, there seems to be evidence suggesting Binghamton University selectively applies its stated policies and procedures to discriminate against students based on the content of their speech and their decision to associate with groups such as College Republicans and Young Americans for Freedom, Young Americans Foundation, otherwise known as YAF. We are seeing hate institutionally supported at our colleges, at our high schools, at our elementary schools, that it is being supported by the major news media, and it is being used against individual after individual. Now, the news media was very happy to cover, or they were forced to cover, the mob violence at Binghamton University. They covered, to an extent, the attack against the young woman, as we showed you. But they were remiss in reporting anything else. They didn't cover the story after that. They didn't mention many things because they only want to highlight specific parts of the story. Maybe you remember that in the city of Binghamton, there was an accusation that young girls, 4 young black girls, were strip searched. It was a story that went around the entire world. People in Australia were citing that story and saying that there is a racial divide in America, that there is hate in America. And it's important to highlight that because in January of 2021, about a year ago, we released this story. The fact that the news media, they left the message out there. Binghamton has schools that are based on hate, that they would strip search young girls of color because of racism. And in fact, where was the news media on this story? Why weren't they telling everyone, no, Binghamton schools were not the racist hotbed that they had told the entire world about? Where was the news media saying that the allegations were not true, that the strip search was actually taking off shoes. Where were they on that? They must be waiting for something. There must be something else. There must be another reason why they wouldn't tell the public that had become divided and had created a racial divide within that city, destroying part of the trust of the community. There had to be something else that they were waiting for because they didn't want to tell the public that there was a final decision. And you know what? They were right. There wasn't a final decision because there was a follow-up. There was an appeal. And that appeal was resolved on November 13th of 2020. And that appeal upheld the prior decision because there was no strip search. So now we're seeing a complicity. We're seeing at the schools, at every level. We're seeing in government and in the news media that they're promoting this idea of this racial division. We're seeing hate, people labeling people based on the color of their skin because of their political preferences. That's coming from the left. That's coming from progressive leaders of tomorrow. That's coming from BLM and Antifa. That's coming from the Democratic Party. It's coming from elected officials. It's not something that's part of the public. That's not what the average American believes. And the average American is being misled. They're being told, oh, racism exists. Here is an example. And then when that is disproven by fact, the news media is nowhere to be seen. They don't cover that story. They don't address that issue. And then that led us to ask the question in 2021, in March. We had to ask, well, what is this about? But we are telling children in high school, in elementary school, that this is the truth, that there should be a commission controlling who gets to say what. And if they say the wrong thing, well, they're racist and bad people, and they should be punished for that. In fact, we've heard that from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. When people disagree with her, as they did in November 6th, she decided that she wants to create lists of individuals, an enemies list, so that they can be punished. When have we ever heard or seen in history when politicians and elected officials, leaders in government, have decided that they need to create a list of enemies, that they have individuals that they have to isolate and that they have to punish, that the government needs to create a truth organization, that the government must define what is truth for the public so that they know what to believe. Where government, again, is invading the individual lives of its citizens and determining for each of them what they will do and what is real. It's terrifying that we have seen this on so many levels over and over again. And I want you to think about this. In 2019, the 18-year-olds today are 21-year-olds. And those individuals who were taught on those universities that said it's okay to hate someone because of the color of their skin. It's okay to hate someone because of their political preference. Those same kids who went through the lockdowns and they were told by government that they are prisoners because they don't listen to the government, that because they have to do what the government wants them to do, that we are watching those kids who are now voting age, who have been programmed over and over again to do what they were told, to stay on the path. Well, what do we think those kids are going to be doing? And by the way, they're not the only ones. It's not just from 2019. The next generation of voters are being told the same thing right now. December of 2021, we saw the institutional racism being promoted at SUNY Broome. And we saw and we had to respond about that as we did here. But we don't have the right to speak freely. You are being chained to the path, and the path has a goal, and that goal only leads one way, which is why there is no conversation and no information that conflicts with the goal of this event. This is what progressivism is in our colleges. It sounds very nice. It sounds very pleasant. It is presented in the nicest way possible, and it is insidious and it is wrong. Now, you may disagree. You may say, well, Mike, no, it's perfectly fine to chain people to a path, to give them no outlet, no way of thinking for themselves, that they must come to the conclusions that have been determined by educators, by elected politicians, by the government. You may say that, but then there are those who do not say that. And in America, they have the right to say that. But those Americans are being punished over and over again. You disagree. Well, then you must be locked up. 55% of Democrats believe that. That's terrifying that any number of people would believe that. And this is something that's happening in our schools, but the news media doesn't want to tell you about that. Again, the news media didn't want to mention that, no, Binghamton schools, the elementary and high school, is not racist. They didn't want to tell the people about that. They wanted the public to forget. The news media didn't want to mention that SUNY Binghamton is still under an investigation, that Binghamton University is still being sued. And in fact, that Binghamton University tried their very best to have the case dismissed, and they failed. In fact, the courts have said, and I quote, "Freedom of speech is a crucial aspect of our democracy. It is essential to be protected and promoted on a college campus, which remains the bulwark of our educational system and where the free exchange of ideas is the bedrock of education itself." Claims of the First Amendment against retaliation from Bingham University and its administration is a valid complaint and must be seen through in the courts. That this case must go forward to protect the First Amendment and equal protection, the 14th Amendment, and the rights of individuals in America to have freedom, to disagree, to express themselves peacefully. And that the university is against that. So in 2021, we see that the news media don't want to cover these events. They don't want you to question or know that anyone is questioning these dictates from government and from educators and from political organizations that have a very defined and very specific agenda. Let me ask you, as we start at the beginning, where is hate coming from? We're seeing that hate coming from our news media and what they will and will not cover. We're seeing it from elected officials who are placing the government above the individual, which is the antithesis of what America is about. We're seeing this come from educators who are giving students only one idea, only one track to go down, only one way to think, and admonishing them and allowing other groups to come into those schools and our communities to punish those students when they do have a separate thought, when they do think independently for themselves. Where's hate coming from in 2022? It's not because of people's race. It's not because of their religious beliefs or their medical decisions. It's not because of health care. It's because people aren't given a choice, because freedom is being whittled away, not slowly, quickly. And we have generation after generation who are going from our schools and are becoming voting adults, and they have been given only one thing to think. Do what you are told. And if you do not, you will be punished. Your voice will be removed from the internet. You will be unpersoned. You will be ostracized. You will be isolated. You will be punished by law and by organizations mob rule, and it will be allowed to attack you, and they will misrepresent the truth in covering half the news story, and they will cover only the negative aspects that are against you and not cover your vindication when you are proven to be correct. Well, Martin Luther King doesn't matter. George Floyd matters. George Floyd is a martyr. He is important. He, the criminal, the violent, drug-addicted criminal, is more important than a preacher and a man of peace, an avowed pacifist. Hate is coming from teachers saying that based on someone's skin color, they are inherently evil, and other groups are inherently victims, and that cannot be changed throughout your life. That you are assigned these items by birth by the color of your skin. That's critical race theory application. Where is the hate coming from? It's when people say that politicians and scientists are smarter and the only voice that can be heard. In 15 years of doing political commentary, I know many politicians of every political ideology. I know Democrats and Libertarians, members of the Green Party, members of Democratic Socialists of America, Republicans, conservatives. I know them all. I speak with them on a regular basis. I've spoken with them when they were candidates. I've spoken with them as they are in office. And I can tell you honestly and absolutely, they're no smarter than anyone else. I've spoken with scientists, literal rocket scientists at times in the last 15 years. They're no smarter than you or I. They're human beings. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they misunderstand. They're no better than anyone else. They make mistakes like everyone does. And their ideologies aren't perfect. And the fact that we are allowing a literal splinter of the Democratic Party to overrule this nation, to overrun our Constitution and our God-given by birth rights is terrifying. Hate is coming from those who do not want you to critically think. Hate is coming from those who want you to obey. We disagree with that. You are not inherently evil or bad or privileged because of the color of your skin. You are not a victim based on the color of your skin. We will never agree with that because it is wrong. It is historically and emphatically, definitively, demonstrably wrong. We don't believe that the government is smarter than the public. You may think we are misguided, that we have misunderstood. But I think even if you don't agree with our conclusion, I think you should be troubled that there is a pattern that is demonstrable, that we have just shown you, where we are seeing people being subjugated. And the result today is a separation and a willingness to punish people for no crime whatsoever. You can be whatever you want to be and still recognize there is a pattern. And that pattern is creating hate. That is what we have to fight against in 2022. At least that's what we think. We look forward to seeing your comments on this and all other issues that we cover every week. And we hope to see you in our live stream on Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.